Linux Mint Debian Edition LMDE 5 is here with Debian 11 Bullseye. The next version upgrade for Linux Mint's Debian variant is here, with all the goodness of Linux Mint 20.3 and Debian 11. Linux Mint's offering with Debian is always an exciting release to look forward to. In case you don't know, LMDE is meant to act as a replacement if Ubuntu ever disappears. So whether you like or hate Ubuntu as a base, you have an impressive alternative without compromising the Linux Mint experience on your desktop. With the latest LMDE 5 Elsie, the Linux Mint team has included all the goodies introduced in Linux Mint 20.3 and Debian 11 Bullseye as its base. Let me highlight the essential details regarding the new upgrade. Linux Mint Debian Edition 5 LEC What's New? As you can guess, Linux Mint Debian Edition 5 comes loaded with Cinnamon as its desktop and looks exactly the same as Linux Mint's, primarily offering with Ubuntu as its base. Cinnamon 5.2.7. Unlike Linux Mint's main edition, you do not get the option for other desktop environments. So, you will have a Cinnamon desktop out of the box with LMDE 5. The latest Cinnamon version includes plenty of improvements to give you a good user experience. 32-bit support still exists. If you are looking for Linux distribution supporting 32-bit systems, LMDE 5 is yet another option that you can opt for. While it may be irrelevant for most modern desktop users, it is still essential for Linux distribution to support 32-bit systems. And it is a good thing that Linux Mint's Debian edition still includes support for it. Linux Kernel 5.10 LTS. Linux Kernel 5.10 may not be the latest LTS release, but it should be the great for most hardware configuration, unless you have the latest and greatest from Intel or AMD. Linux Mint 20.3 improvements. With LMDE 5, the Linux Mint team has tried their best to add all the improvements introduced in Linux Mint 20.3 with a new Debian base. You can notice the availability of new wallpaper backgrounds and get the latest app additions like Thingy or Library to manage documents. In addition to these features, you also get the experience the same visual refresh to the theme with round edges and slightly changes to the theme color. How to download LMDE 5? Before proceeding to install it, you may want to go through the official release notes to know about some common issues. You can download the 64-bit or 32-bit ISO from the official website. If you are using LMDE 5 beta, you do not need to upgrade, but type in a few commands as per the instruction in the release announcement. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit the thumbs up button. It helps make a good content for you. Other than that, I'll see you in tomorrow's video. Peace out.